Here on Theology Geek, we are all about looking at the world through the lens of theology. And today, we're going to do a book review. We're going to look at Culture Maker by Andy Crouch and find out what he's got to say. First of all, I've got to say, this is a great book and it's really well written. Andy Crouch was the editor at Christianity Today for like 10 years, and so the guy knows how to write. It's got good metaphors in it, interesting stories, and I would say in this book, Andy does two things really well. He takes really complicated ideas and he simplifies them and makes them accessible, and then the second thing he does is he's read an awful lot. He's read tons and tons. If you look at the bibliography, it's crazy the amount of books that he's read, and then he's boiled all that information down and given it to us in a format which is accessible and easy to understand. Right, so first question, what is the format of the book? Well, it's broken down nicely into three sections: culture, gospel and calling. And in the first section, in that culture chunk at the beginning, he's kind of doing diagnostic tools, he's giving us definitions, there's a lot of sociology and anthropology. It feels like the kind of opening meaty academic chunk. And then in the middle, the gospel section is kind of a theological reflection on how culture is used and talked about in the Bible. And then in the third section, calling, is kind of like Andy's kind of call to arms to the church to engage culture in a particular way. And what we'll see by the time we get there is that it's far more complicated than we might have at first thought. Okay, so three key ideas from this opening section on culture. Firstly, a definition. So for Andy, he defines culture like this. Culture is making something of the world. And so we take the raw materials, the raw ingredients of the world that we find around us, and then we make something. And he suggests there are two things you can make. You can either make artifacts, you know, products, things, something, or you can make meaning out of the world in which we see it. And those are the two kind of key ways in which culture is created in our world. And so that means that culture is a creative process. Making culture is a creative process, but it also means that you can't make culture as an abstract idea. What you make is something. You don't make culture, you make omelets. You don't make culture, you write a book. Okay, so the second key idea from this section on culture is that cultural products have to be used by the society around them, otherwise they don't generate culture. They're not actually adding any value. As a result, all cultures have a sphere of influence and they have a scale, they have a size. Some of those cultures are huge and some of those cultural products have a massive scale, like capitalism, for example. And some of those cultures and cultural products have a small scale. You know, like a family unit will have a certain culture and have certain cultural products and ways of understanding and seeing the world, but it's just related to that family as opposed to the whole of the Western civilization. And thirdly, from this opening section on culture, if you want to change culture, you have to produce a new cultural product or artifact or meaning. By copying or consuming or critiquing culture, those things don't actually change the culture around you. If you want to change it, you have to produce something tangible, and for that thing to then be taken up by the society around you. That's the only way you can actually change a culture, by producing more culture. That's how cultures change. Andy's second section, which is called gospel. Now this is a really important section, particularly if you're the sort of person who gets nervous about just taking ideas from secular society willy-nilly. This is the section that really plants this book in the Christian theology world. It starts to ask some questions that really get answered in the third section about what would be a particularly Christian way of creating and making culture. So it's a really important section, but for me at least, I found it was the section that I was most familiar with. I'd done some study on this before, and so if you're someone who's familiar with the big storyline of the Bible and can make some of those links between the Bible and culture, then this might be the sort of section that you can skim read or just breeze through quite quickly, because for me at least, it was the sort of thing that I get this, I understand what you're doing, Andy, appreciate it, but let's move on. Right, so at this point, calling, I expected Andy to give this big call to arms where he kind of encouraged everyone to get into culture making and world changing, and he doesn't do that at all. It's fantastic, profoundly powerful. I reckon that Andy has accurately diagnosed that most of his readership have only read up to this point because they want to be the sort of people who are changing culture and fixing the world. And he actually starts the first chapter of this section called Why We Can't Change the World. It's a really helpful set of cautionary tales and a really helpful dose of humble pie. Having said all of this, Andy argues that the job of Christian culture makers is to produce Christian products which are in line with God's mission on the earth. This means creating cultural products which empower the poorest and the weakest in society, which develop lasting peace, which steward the world and its natural resources, and which build local community. And that's just a few options. There are loads of things that culture makers could do which would be in line with God's mission for the world. In the final couple of chapters of this book, Andy he just paints a beautiful picture of the church and left me feeling bright and excited about the world and all its opportunities. It's just some superb storytelling and writing which will inspire you and encourage you. I thoroughly recommend this book. It's worth reading. It's a great intro into the conversation about theology and culture, and that's what this YouTube channel is all about. So if you're interested in finding more videos like this one, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. And if you want to buy a copy of this book, I've left a link in the description box just down below.